File 23-1307 FH, People of the State of Michigan versus Lisa Cober. Are you Lisa Cober, ma'am?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Cober appears with her attorney, Mr. Robert Hedges. The people are represented by Mr. J.S. Coops. The date and time scheduled for the sentencing in this case. Have the people had a chance to read the pre-sentence report and the attached guideline?
Yes, sir.
Any additions or corrections to the report itself?
Not to the report. Well, yes. On page 2 of the body, under description of offense narrative, it says search warrant was composed on 127/23 and executed at the Sheffield house. It might have been composed on that day, but it was executed on 130. I don't know if that makes too much of a difference for today's purposes.
Okay, I think I'll just say a search warrant was composed on 127/23 and executed on, you said 130 of
Yes.
23. Any objection to that change, Mr. Hedges?
No, the defense agrees to that.
Okay. All right, anything else, Mr. Cooper?
Thank you, Your Honor. People do have objections, some objections to the scoring.
Okay.
We've already discussed these in our review. Specifically that OB 16, offense rule 16 for number of dogs should be scored at 25. Which is not 25 dogs, that's the number. That's as high as the points go.
Okay.
So that, which would take these total offense variables to 25 and change the 17 guidelines to C3, 0 to 17.
Any objection to that change, Mr. Hedges?
No, and I would also note, Your Honor, that it reads Class F. This is actually Class D.
All right, so 0
But the
total.
guidelines are still 0 to 17.
So total OBs are 25, OB level 3, and then it's 0 to 17, correct, Mr. Cooper?
That's right.
Correct.
Okay. All right, any other additions or corrections, Mr. Cooper?
No, thank you.
All right, Mr. Hedges, have you had an opportunity to review the pre-sentence report and the attached guidelines?
Yes, I have, Your Honor.
Any additions or corrections that you have?
No.
All right, Ms. Cober, have you had an opportunity to review the pre-sentence report and the attached guidelines?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any additions or corrections you have?
No, Your Honor.
Just for the record, the court has received numerous letters from individuals letters of support as well as letters of concern regarding Ms. Cober. The court also has receipt of some restitution documentation as well, which we'll address a little bit later. I am in receipt also of a psychological assessment authored by an Antonio Corretto, licensed clinical psychologist. The court has considered that in determining the sentence in this case. However, the court is going to make that a non-public record because it contains sensitive medical information. I think that's by agreement of the parties. Is that correct, Mr. Cooper?
So stipulated, Your Honor.
Mr.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so the court is going to make sure that gets scanned into the file, but again, it'll be a non-public portion of the record. Mr. Coop, any allocution?
Thank you, Your Honor. In this case, I think any outsider and those involved, it's easy when looking at the facts to have anger for Ms. Cober, to have contempt when you see inside the home and see all the animals, 78 animals in a area I would assume smaller than this house, or excuse me, this room. She wrote a letter to the court for sentencing, and in there she makes many statements that at first glance you could be offended by. You could be offended that she believes the Big Lake Animal Clinic, those that were involved in early stages, that got authorities involved, did this to, kind of elbow her out of the rescue business so that Pound Buddies could get more shelter animals. Statements like that make you scratch your head, like how? When she enters her plea, she gives an acknowledgement that there were too many animals at their house, but much more than that she would not say. It becomes much harder what to do in this case in terms of sentencing, what justice would look like, because there are many characters many actors in this case, what justice looks like for the veterinarian that had to euthanize all these animals, for the workers that had to go into the home and see all this, for the individuals that unfortunately but did adopt from Lisa Cober, only to have to euthanize the pet the next day because of illness. Especially when she tells them, oh, the dog just has a cough because of the leash that was on its neck. Meanwhile, she had gone to the veterinarian days before and knew that they were treating it for kennel cough. She adopts dogs out knowing just the day before she had put another dog down for distemper, but doesn't share that information with the person that she's adopting the dog out to. She even makes statements to the court in her letter that she would never adopt a dog out that was sick. It would be irresponsible. All this is aggravating. But like I said, it becomes harder to know what to do when we get that opinion from the doctor that says Lisa Cober has a hoarding disorder. And from the outset of this case, I thought something else was going on. I thought this was a hoarding case, but I didn't really know what that meant. So I spent the weekend kind of getting into the literature, and frankly, I was a little bit shocked and very concerned now. Because when you read the letter to the court that Lisa Cober provided, there's no accountability. There's no seeing what is happening here. She wants to represent that I just got overwhelmed by these dogs from Texas. But if we go back, Lisa Cober has been on the radar, albeit flying under it, for many years. She had the case in, I believe it was 2018, where she, in 2018 in Fruitport, where a neighbor complained. She had 22 dogs there. The officer there thought that there were too many dogs for the house, but otherwise things looked okay. That was 310 of 2018. Then 1/4 of 19, we have a complaint in Eggleston at 5549. So now, a year later, she's at a different address. And at that time, she thought she had 20-something dogs. In fact, she had 40. And then she moves, not long after, to the house here that ultimately we find 78 dogs in at Sheffield. This case was the ultimate conclusion. This was always going to happen. It wasn't just a one-off that she got a bad batch of dogs from Texas. Ms. Cober, if you go back in history, there's a letter to the court that I did not solicit, someone from the public sent to the court about a 2020 case where they're adopting out or receiving a sick dog from Ms. Cober. Hoarding disorder has multiple levels of the rescue hoarder, the exploitive hoarder, and the overwhelmed. Ms. Cober wants to keep saying she's overwhelmed. She's not. This is not that. She actively seeks out dogs. While the Norton Shores zoning department is telling her she has too many dogs, she has to get them out, she keeps representing, I'm getting rid of them, I'm getting my numbers down. But a dog got sick, and so it'd be irresponsible to adopt out a dog. Well, in that time, she's still adopting out dogs. And yet, in that time, as they're telling her, you have to get rid of your dogs, she's getting more dogs in. The literature states that with animal hoarding, without meaningful treatment, without strict treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy is the preferred method right now, that the recidivism rate is 100%. That is a daunting number. The specialist, the doctor that Ms. Cober saw here to get that diagnosis or that opinion states that Ms. Cober may benefit from having a dog. And I think the literature is split on that both ways. But at this juncture, I do not think Ms. Cober should have a dog. We have resources available that should be consulted. Kent County has a hoarding task force that I think should be consulted on what this probation looks like. I'm absolutely asking for that 5 years probation. But before we just hand over or say, Ms. Cober, break, you've reached the end of this stage. Here's a dog for you now. That's totally irresponsible. She does not acknowledge, cannot see what occurred in her home. You have the workers that are there. I think those are the people that we should be looking to see what the condition of that home is. The people that are wearing masks, Ms. Cober, when she first met with Ms. Robertson, said, "Oh, don't mind the bleach." Totally unaware of everything else that's around her. This is classic hoarding behavior on her. Unless we want further burdens on our community, both the citizens and the animal clinics. I mean, Big Lake Animal Clinic is out $17,738.86. Harbor Humane is out $14,226.58. And we still have some restitution numbers yet to get. This is not a case that just involves Ms. Cober or the few individuals that she boxed animals out to. It involves the whole community, and this is going to be a community problem, especially with that 100% recidivism rate. At a minimum, I think she should not have dogs right now. I think probation, we should set maybe a check-in a month down the road to consult those outside resources to see what structures, what parameters need to be put in place for Ms. Cober. Because otherwise, we are going to be back here in short time. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Good.
Thank you. Your Honor, Ms. Cober has pled guilty to this offense and takes responsibility for her wrongdoing. On January 30th of 2023, Ms. Cober's animal rescue had 78 canines under her control in conditions that constitute overcrowding. Additionally, some of the dogs that she had recently received from the state of Texas had a disease, a very serious disease, called canine distemper, which is frequently fatal to animals. But obviously, Ms. Cober was not the cause of that disease, and she didn't ask for that disease to be brought up with these animals from Texas. And that particular disease has an incubation period of about 4 to 6 weeks, so she didn't realize it at first. And the early symptoms are not that different than other non-lethal illnesses, such as kennel cough, for example. But once she learned that she had, once she learned by a test that she actually had canine distemper in her house, she immediately stopped sending out any adopting out any other animals, and she reached out for help. And when she reached out to the local agencies for help, that's what led to this police investigation and brings us here today for this case. As we discuss the sentencing, I want to make several points, but at the beginning, as I make these points, I'm not denying or that she's responsible and that she needs to be held responsible. She has pled guilty, and she understands that she's going to have a sentence imposed upon her, and it's going to have significant consequences for her life. She understands that. But the question is, what should the sentence be? And in that light, there's several points that I would like the court to take into consideration. First of all, under the Michigan sentencing guidelines and statutes, particularly MCL 769.34, parent 4, parent A, this is a presumptively no jail offense. Secondly, at the time of the plea, the court decided under People v. Cobbs to make the initial commitment, at least, to no upfront jail, and I would ask the court to continue to follow that. 3, although the title to this offense is animal abandonment or cruelty, this case really doesn't involve any deliberate cruelty on the part of Ms. Cober. For 6 years, Ms. Cober operated a nonprofit animal rescue. During that period of time, she saved over 1,400 dogs from being euthanized simply because they were unwanted. That was the nature of her rescue. She did do a lot of rescue work from Texas because, unlike Michigan, where we actually have some pretty good operations, comparatively speaking, in Texas it's awful. And the animals have, we have what we call no-kill shelters. They're not 100% no-kill, but we have shelters here committed to no-kill. In Texas, that's not the situation at all. And most of the dogs that come off the street, the abandoned dogs or the dogs that are simply turned in as not wanted anymore, they're almost guaranteed to die as unwanted. And that's the work that she was doing to save these animals. During this time period, she not only was this operation no profit, but she invested thousands of dollars of her own money, and she was not a wealthy person, for veterinary bills and medicines and neuterings and vaccinations. And when you look at those factors, that is not the profile of an animal abuser. That's not the profile of somebody who's committing animal cruelty. During this time period, she devoted 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. She never had a day off. She never had a vacation during that 6-year period that she was operating the rescue. As Mr. Coop alluded to, during this time period, there was 2 prior police contacts with Ms. Cober in 2018 and 2019, first in Fruitport, then in Eggleston Township. In the first one, there were 22 dogs, but the dogs were all healthy and the premises was clean. And there was no prosecution or follow-up action by the police or by the prosecutor's office. Secondly, in the following year, there's 40 dogs, and again, the only consequence of there was no criminal prosecution. The dogs again were healthy, the premises was clean, and the only consequence was a zoning violation. That seems to suggest that absence the unusual factor that contributed in this case, the diseased animals coming up from Texas, she was very good at keeping the premises clean and the animals healthy. In fact, of the 78 dogs that were taken into custody on January 30th of 2023, 69 of them, unless something's happened since the adoptions afterwards, are alive and healthy. That's because of the work that she did under difficult circumstances. And when we look at the Norton Shores Police Department's chain of custody list, I think 2/3 of the animals that were taken into custody were just listed as healthy. And many of the ones that were unhealthy, certainly some had the disease, and that's what led to 9 of them dying. But most of them had minor injuries, and some of those injuries were from, they were street dogs in Texas before they were taken to a pound and eventually brought up to Michigan and turned over to Ms. Cober. They were minor injuries. So when you put all those factors together, there's nothing here that really indicates that she is engaging in deliberate animal cruelty. Many of the attached letters to the pre-sentence report, and I'm not going to quote extensively from any of them. I know the court has had an opportunity and has read them. Those who know Ms. Cober best attest to her love and never-ending commitment and concern for the animals that she was trying to save. I will quote from one letter where the writer, or at least mention one letter, where the writer describes a situation where Ms. Cober was deciding to pay $5,000 for cancer treatment for a seriously ill dog. And it was questioned, why are you doing that? She said, because this dog has had a hard life. That's a better depiction of the kind of person Ms. Cober is. She didn't have a lot of money, and she worked hard for the money that she did have. And this was not a money-making operation. This was a money-losing operation. But she did it out of concern and love for the animals. In some of the letters attached, I think, although they're written on behalf of Ms. Cober, a few of the writers, I think, hit the nail on the head, and it's the same conclusion that Dr. Coretto recognizes, that she loved all these animals, would do everything she could for them, but she didn't know when to say no, or she couldn't say no. I think that's Dr. Coretto's conclusion too. And it's a situation where she's looking at these animals, and she knows that if she says no to taking on this additional animal, that animal's going to die. It's like she's imposing a death sentence on the animal if she doesn't take it. And under those circumstances, she always had room for one more dog, and then one more dog, and then one more dog. So the situation that we end up with on January 30th, where she had 70 dogs, and admittedly in a place that was not appropriate for that many dogs. There's no question about that. And that's primarily why she pled guilty, because the overcrowding was indefensible. I think the court should follow its previous Cobb's recommendation and impose a sentence that has no upfront jail. But Dr. Coretto made some other observations. She does conclude that Ms. Cober is a type of hoarder. She's not the cruel type of hoarder, and Dr. Coretto makes that clear in her report, that this was not out of any cruelty to the animals. But that Dr. Coretto recommends that she receive counseling for what's motivating her to do this. And I think, and I've discussed that with Ms. Cober. Ms. Cober wants to do that counseling. Whether you order it or not, I think you should order it, and she will embrace that and do that. The final thing I want to talk about is the recommendation of Dr. Coretto that Ms. Cober be allowed to have contact with animals. And specifically, she said, when we're talking about, we're not talking about having anything to do with any rescue operation or anything like that, certainly not. But and we're not talking about her being the person who's primarily in charge of the animals. But we're talking about her having, being allowed to have contact. And I think in Ms. Coretto's report, she says allowing her to have appropriate normal relationships with dogs, not in her care, could in fact be therapeutic and rehabilitative. And that's the whole purpose of the sentencing and the probation, is to rehabilitate the person and to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I think that can be done even better with allowing some limited contact, possibly put a number limit on the number of dogs, a very small number of dogs, 3 perhaps or something like that. And she can't be the primary person responsible for the dog. And so with all that, Your Honor, I would ask the court to impose a sentence that accomplishes these goals and takes into recognition that this is a woman who, and I think in 2016 she won an award for Fox 17 Pay It Forward for Person of the Year for volunteer work that she did with needy school children. That's a better indication of the type of person that she is. She does have some psychological issues, and those psychological issues drive her to try and help other people or help dogs or save dogs. And generally speaking, that's not a bad thing, but she can't control, she doesn't know when to say no. But that's not in any way, shape, or form a person who is cruel to animals. And I would ask the court to take that into consideration in the sentence.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hedges. Ms. Cober, is there anything you wish to see?
I would.
Yes,
I'll play. I wrote it out, so I wouldn't forget. I'm sorry. Just a moment.
Take your time.
I've always been an animal lover, an empath, and I give myself to anyone or anything. I started my rescue to help save the animals that humans had failed. I was a Fox 17 person of the year in 2016 for starting a program in my hometown for kids in high school that lacked the basic needs, clothing, food, backpacks, etc. I also helped start that same program in several other schools all over the state. I'm the kind of person who would stop a vehicle to remove an injured duck on a highway just so it would not continue to suffer, move a turtle off the side of the road to ensure it makes it to safety, and stop traffic to help a chihuahua that had gotten out of a fence so it didn't get hit by a car. Now I'm here today because I had too many dogs in my home. I got in over my head without even realizing it, which unfortunately in rescue is extremely easy to do. As Mr. Head has pointed out, I had 1,400 animals that I was able to place in loving homes. Although I would say that I have saved even more than that. In rescue, when you save them from the shelter, you're not only saving the one you're taking out of the shelter, you're saving the one that you're making space to come in. If you save one off the street, you end up saving hundreds, if not thousands, by removing at least one unaltered animal off the streets. Taking an owner surrender is helping keep the shelters and humane societies free for an additional stray rather than those owner surrenders. Not only are we saving the lives of the animals, but we are also saving the lives of the families and humans that adopt them. I know the animals have saved me more than a time or two as well, especially my service dogs. I knew I was overwhelmed, and I had called and emailed and inquired to every shelter and humane society that I worked with in the past. And they said that, and this was prior to the illness that hit my home in 2013, to assist in helping moving a lot of the long-term fosters, hoping that maybe someone bigger than me had more of a following and could get them into homes. Unfortunately, there was no help. I was alone, and I was struggling to make it all work, with too many dogs, not enough sleep, and too much work for just me to do. I also had the inability to say no to taking new ones because I knew that I could help save them. I was a small rescue, and maybe with the help of some of the larger humane societies and animal controls, that these dogs would have a chance at a home. Unfortunately, they were just as full as I was and were unable to take them. I did admit I got overwhelmed with the amount of animals, but I would never abuse, neglect, or torture them in any way. All I wanted to do was save them. Even with the daunting email of maybe I should just euthanize all of them, I couldn't do that. That went against everything that I stood for. Prior to the illness, I was able to spend hours with the dogs, playing, socializing, taking care of them, and cleaning. I said from the very beginning I had too many dogs, and what you have seen on TV or heard through social media is a small snippet of what the real story was. They only saw it at its worst. As previously stated, there were police officers at my home. There were never any concerns with the cleanliness until this illness. I can tell you that this past year has been extremely difficult. This whole thing took my service dogs, my passion, pretty much my life. But since I have found a new world that I was not enjoying, I can tell you that those first people who originally contacted me after all this happened, asking me to help taking their dogs or find them homes, I had to say no to. It was extremely difficult, but it was a step in the right direction, if you were to ask me. Once the first no was said, it was easier to say no again. It was quite an eye-opening experience, to say the least, something I had never experienced. I can tell you and promise I'm never getting back into rescue, running a rescue, or fostering. I know that there are other ways to help other than doing it myself. Networking, coordinating, educating, and spreading the word of low-cost clinics and spay neuters. There are so many things I would have done different, so many different choices would have been made, but again, hindsight is 20/20. I know I messed up by taking on too many dogs and too much for a single person to do alone. When the dogs were taken, I will pride myself on the fact that not one of them were heartworm positive, because I had already paid and treated them for it. and actually I'm still paying on it. Most of the dogs were fixed. All of the dogs were up to date on vaccinations, all because of my doing. Paying for medical bills when the forfeiture happened. All but a handful of dogs were adopted, mostly by fosters who were caring for them. The shelters got those adoption fees, which originally I had planned for my medical bills for the dogs. I am the one that paid for their sterilizations, microchips, heartworm treatment, vaccinations, and prevention. I am pleading you take all of this into account. I beg you take into account that if I was taking in a dog to be malicious or cruel, would I have really spent thousands of dollars on their medical care? Would I still be paying off those debts that were incurred when I was doing rescue? That money from adoptions and my pocket were what was paying for them. When considering my sentence, I ask that you take a few things into account. If there was someone standing next to me who purposely tortured, beat, starved, and potentially killed even a handful of dogs, they would be able to live with animals, they would be able to own animals, and they would be facing a misdemeanor. They would not be facing the same sentencing that I am. They would be able to go on with their lives without any hesitation. Again, I ask you to allow me to live with animals. You can have my probation officer come to check the numbers. I'm willing to submit medical records, not necessarily that I own, but somebody else who lives in the home does, which, by the way, I still have all of the boxes of records of the animals I've helped over the almost last decade. Whatever is needed for your peace of mind. If you choose not to let me own, that's fine. I just thought it wouldn't hurt to ask. My crime was caring too much and not being able to say no to help them. As Mr. Hedges pointed out, saying no meant a death sentence, and one yes led to another. I have done a lot of self-reflection, self-improvement, and unbeknownst to Mr. Hedges, I have already sought advice and counseling from someone. I know that walking a thin line of having too many dogs was being helpful and part of the problem. Something I never wanted to do. Something I never want to do again. If allowed to own or live with animals, please know that they would be spoiled and loved within the limits of the ordinance. I have paid an extreme price already, not only monetary, but emotionally, mentally, physically, and psychologically. Thank you for letting me speak.
All right, thank you, Ms. Cober. Well, as I indicated, the court, there's probably at least 50-plus letters the court has reviewed, both in support of Ms. Cober as well as individuals who had personal experience with her in terms of dog rescuing, in terms of being in the house where these dogs were taken from. The court also has read and reread the report by Dr. Coretto, a PhD, who's a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm a human being, so when the first thing when I look at this case is in the pretrial motions, the court was able to review the videos inside the house, pictures. The video I think was a little more helpful because it kind of puts you there. And the first thing that kind of shocked me was as soon as the doors open, there's all these dogs in there. And the first thing is I've owned a dog my entire life. My kids have rabbits. We have I've owned birds in my life, and I'm an animal lover. And I think I recognize although animals are property under the law, I think there's a more of a connection. My kids ride horses, so there's a connection there. The first thing is anger. Like, how could somebody not know that this was bad? This is bad. There's one of the dogs that struck me was in a crate that was too small for it. I think it was like a lab or maybe a golden retriever lab mix. And it's that emotional side. And then the thing for this court is, and I've always tried to do this even in private practice, was I recognition of I'm not a doctor, I'm not a counselor. I'm not a plumber, I'm not an electrician. There's certain things that I don't know. There's expertise I don't have. And so, you know, for me, I look at, okay, what is going on here? And I think one of the biggest things I wanted after Ms. Cober pled, and even when there was discussions before she pled, I really would like to get a real detailed psychological analysis on this person to try to figure out, is this a cruel thing? Is this somebody, you know, getting some kind of sick pleasure out of these animals, to torturing them? Is this something financial? Is this something that somebody's trying to get a financial benefit out of, neglecting animals? And the psychological profile that was done by Dr. Coretta was very insightful. And also the court is in a unique position, unlike, you know, members of the public, to look at, okay, is this really financial? And what's really clear to me, at least, is this was not done for financial gain. All of evidence in front of me shows that it actually was a financial detriment to Ms. Cober to do so. I don't know what fees she was taking in, or I do know what fees she was taking in, but certainly wouldn't have covered the costs. In addition, Ms. Cober was sleeping amongst this. There is a bed inside this house where there is animal waste and just stuff everywhere, barely room to move around, and she's sleeping in this. And so somebody, I would think somebody who is meant to do this maliciously would not put themselves in this environment. So the court looked at this psychological evaluation to figure out, okay, what exactly going on here? And just quoting part of it, and not specifically to Ms. Cober, although there's a diagnosis of animal hoarding by Dr. Coretta, and then it says, there is no, I'm quoting from the report, there is no DSM-5 diagnosis specific to animal hoarding. The Hoarding of Animals Research Consortium identifies the following characteristics as common to all animal hoarders. First, the accumulation of numerous animals, which has overwhelmed that person's ability to provide even minimal standards of nutrition, sanitation, and veterinarian care. Two, failure to acknowledge the deteriorating condition of the animals, including disease, starvation, and even death. And the household environment, severe overcrowding, very unsanitary conditions. And three, failure to recognize the negative effect of the collection on their own health and well-being and on that of other household members. Since researchers have found that there are several traits that are common among individuals with animal hoarding disorder. One is the belief that they are saving and caring for animals, and another is the compulsive continuation of acquiring more animals. Both of these persist despite evidence that they are providing inadequate care. The disorder impairs insight and judgment. The court needs to take into consideration four primary things when imposing a sentence. It's a likelihood or potential that the offender could be reformed, the need to protect society, the penalty or consequence appropriate to the offender's contact, and the goal of deterring others from similar conduct. Unlike a violent offense, the sentence imposed, I don't think would necessarily deter, a jail sentence would necessarily deter Ms. Cober from reoffending, because this is a compulsive disorder. It's a significant psychological disorder that needs to be addressed. The jail sentence, in my opinion, based on, and not my opinion, but based on the counselors, would not serve the goal of deterring others from similar conduct, or others similarly situated to Ms. Cober are going to engage in this sort of behavior compulsively without the regard for themselves or their personal health. Very clearly that they would continue to do this despite the threat of penalty. When the court looks at Ms. Cober's record, she has a minimal criminal history, and she's age 44 years old. The sentencing guidelines in this particular case, they're advisory guidelines at this point, but they're 0 to 17 months. Mr. Hedges cites the law correctly. The state of Michigan, our legislature, engaged in criminal justice reform a couple years back, and they established a sentencing guideline structure that provides a presumption of no jail if the guideline top range is under 18 months, unless the court finds reasonable grounds to do so. This charge is over 25 animals. I think the sentencing guidelines do adequately take into consideration all the factors in this case. So the court does find that there is a need to protect society from Ms. Cober at this stage. Normally the court would want an offender to take significant responsibility for their actions. It's one of the things when a lot of young people come in here, it's, you know, you want them to say, look, I recognize what's wrong here, I recognize I did wrong. I think Ms. Cober has taken some responsibility, certainly not as much as I think I would like or anybody else would, but given the psychological disorder she is suffering from, there has not been really any treatment at this point in time. The court would not expect her to come in here and just completely fall on the sword. If she did that based on the court's reading of the psychological profile, I think I would find it disingenuous, quite frankly, because the individuals engaging in this kind of behavior, it takes a very long time. Ms. Coletto also indicates there's a very, very high recidivism rate for this. And that is concerning to the court. So the court feels the best sentence to meet all of the goals in this particular case would be to impose a significant term of probation. It's the highest under Michigan law that the court can give. So the court is going to impose a probationary term of 5 years. The court's going to adopt the conditions listed on page 2 of the report. The court is going to order you to serve 100 hours of community service, Ms. Cober. The court is going to order that you not possess or own any animals for the term of the probation. The court is going to require you to engage in counseling, similar to the type recommended by Ms. Dr. Coretto. The court is going to order you to provide any counselor that you engage with a copy of this report, because I think it's very insightful. Hopefully Dr. Coretto would make herself available to the counselor, but I think the court we need to find a counselor who is tailored to this particular mental disorder. So that is going to be an order of the court. The court's going to order you to serve 2 days in jail, credit for 2 days you've already served. There is a $130 crime victim rights assessment, $30 probation oversight fees, $68 state cost, and $450 court cost. The rehabilitative goals of probation are to find a counselor that fits your particular mental health needs, to engage in that counseling, to follow all recommendations of that counselor. The court's going to rehabilitative goals to continue maintaining your legitimate employment, making regular payments of restitution. In regards to the restitution amounts, the court has received some documentation. My understanding is there's still some documentation that needs to be exchanged among the parties. It's not surprising, given that's happened. Typically, the parties want to sit down and look over. If there is not an agreement, then certainly either Mr. Hedges or Mr. Coop, you can ask the court for a restitution hearing. I'm going to reserve restitution for 60 days, so just got to schedule a hearing sometime in that time.
Okay.
So the court has read the report. There is some suggestion that the contact with animals would be beneficial to Ms. Cober's psychological needs. There was a portion from the report regarding this connection with animals that someone who's an animal hoarder may have, and it says a common pathway for someone to become an animal hoarder is that a child growing up in a chaotic environment fails to make a secure attachment to the untrustworthy adults and instead develops dysfunctional bonds with the animals, which provide a conflict-free relationship and a way to meet their needs of feeling valued. I think that maybe Ms. Cober has a better connection with animals than she even does with people sometimes. But understanding that, this is a disorder that we need to get a hang on, and I think the court is going to order no contact with animals until Ms. Cober at least engages in the counseling for at least a 30 to 60-day window and the court receives some kind of report about her level of engagement, I want to see this counseling started to get some assurances that there's some kind of treatment, or at least beginning stages, before the court allows contact with animals. Ms. Cober, I don't think you would intentionally hurt an animal. I don't think that. But I think that, like many people who come in front of me, they suffer from a mental condition. And unfortunately, it causes them to do things that are negative to the people around them and often to themselves. That should not be something you're ashamed of. There are a lot of people who have mental disorders, and they come in front of me and they're in jail because they've had contact with the police or something like that. It's something that you need to look at and be honest with yourself about and say, okay, how can I address this? And I think that, at least based on what Dr. Coretto indicated, I think you have the ability to lead a healthy life without any kind of mental distress or run-ins with the law, basically, for having too many animals or fall back into this. Now, you heard Mr. Coop. He indicates the recidivism rate he's seeing is 100%. I think Dr. Coretto, it's not 100%, but it's close. But that means that you have the opportunity to move beyond this and hopefully not fall back into this behavior, but it's going to take a lot of work on your part, and I hope you do engage in that. I mean, the court has you on probation for 5 years, and I would absolutely love it for you to overcome this. And obviously the biggest concern for me is making sure you engage in counseling, and the second biggest concern for me is making sure you make these individuals whole in terms of restitution. That is a huge thing for this court, to make victims whole. So that is also something I understand that you're working, there's a lot of bills, but I look at regular payments and restitution. Whatever you're able to do, as long as it's a regular payment, that's what the court wants you to do. So I hope you engage in counseling. I'm not completely foreclosing the opportunity for you to have contact with animals, okay? But I need some assurances that you're engaged in counseling, and this counseling is making some sort of impact before I let that happen. So that's the sentence of the court. You have a right to file an application.
May I ask for some additional conditions or bring up some additional conditions? Sure. People would ask that the probation department and or local law enforcement with connection with probation be allowed to do unannounced random home checks to ensure that she doesn't have dogs in the residence. I'd also like that she has to identify a residence to probation and be sure that she's staying at that residence. Because a lot of times, there'll be, let's say she identifies this residence or identifies her boyfriend's residence as her primary and keeps all the dogs over here. That's not uncommon to see in hoarding cases. And I also asked for, in order that she not be allowed to leave the state without prior approval and providing where she's going, what she's doing through probation, because she has a history of adopting dogs out of state. And so I would ask for those conditions to also be added, Your Honor. Thank you.
Any input on that, Mr. Hedges?
I'm not sure. I mean, generally, she needs permission of her probation officer from the state anyhow, and I think that's sufficient. But I don't think we need an additional recommendation or requirement in that regard. The part about, having the police to be able to come over at any hour, any time, or something like that. I mean, maybe some reasonable. It seems overly invasive for somebody that's already been through what she's been through. Or if the court does decide to impose that, I would ask that have a time limit on it for maybe the first 30 days or something like that. But for her to be subject to that kind of invasion in her personal life for 5 years is, I think, really overstretching.
Okay. Agent Brown, I'm going to authorize you to have the ability to do unannounced visits within your discretion. I'm not going to allow any law enforcement officer. I think that's a little too heavy-handed to let any law enforcement. Agent Brown typically, in a lot of cases, has the ability to go to the houses. And in his discretion, Agent Brown, if you feel that there's a concern or if somebody calls and says, hey, they saw her with an animal or even for any reason,
Obviously you want to keep that to daytime hours. I don't think you're in typical the habit of going over at night anyway, just because there's a lot of risks associated with that. So I will give them discretion as almost any agent or any probationer that they can certainly go to their house and drop them or do whatever they need to do. So, and Mr. Coop, certainly if your office or Victim Services receives a report of potentially owning animals, I'd ask you to make that known to the court, and certainly the court will further instruct Mr. Brown. So I'm believing when regular probationers, if I get reports of them engaging in behavior, I take a look at them to make sure everything's done appropriately. So. All right, so Ms. Cober, you have a right to file an application for leave to appeal your conviction and sentence. If you're financially unable to retain an attorney, one will be appointed to a public expense. Request for assistance to a lawyer must be made within 42 days from today's date. Clerk is handing you a form that you must complete and return to court in that 42 days if you wish to request the appointment of an attorney on appeal. H.M. Brown, when do you want her to meet with you?
This afternoon at 1:30.
Okay, so Ms. Cober, you need to report the probation office at 1:30 this afternoon.
Excuse me, Your Honor.
Yes.
Restitution is reserved, so there was none ordered at this time.
None ordered at this time, but reserved for 60 days.
Oh, thank you.
Yep. All right. We're adjourned.
Same design.